MÓR JÓKAI, 1825 to 1904. From the Suomi-Unkari magazine, the magazine of the Finland-Hungary Friendship Society, issue 6-7, 1954. MÓR JÓKAI, 1825 to 1904. He is the great storyteller of Hungarian literature. With his rich imagination, skill for storytelling, exciting tales and interesting characters, he has conquered a wide readership for his novels. He made the Hungarian novel understandable to the people. In him, Hungarian narrative art found its master. He was the first in Hungary who really elevated the novel to an artistic level. In poetry, even in narrative poetry, Hungarian literature had already earlier created noteworthy and democratic works, but before Jókai, even the most skilled Hungarian prose writers could only produce partially successful works. The best Hungarian scientist of his time, Lerant Eötvös, expressed the feelings of the entire Hungarian reading public in 1894 when Jókai's 50th year as a writer was celebrated. His words did honor to the popular nature of the novelist in a way that still applies today. Quote, "You have achieved being popular in style, not with artificial but with simple means. Only a writer who is broadly understandable achieves a wide readership, and you are understood by everyone, both the upper class and the plebeians. You have always written, the way the words flow into your pen, clearly in a Hungarian way. But in what you write there is something else too, something that captures the reader, something whose roots the scientist seeks in vain. It is that poetic spellbinding power which the goddess of poetry gives only to her rare favorites. Nor is that enchanting power only ornamentation. Rather, in the hands of the writer, it is a force with which he can lead the masses to the road of uplifting or defeat. You have put your pen to the service of the forces of good. That you write so beautifully and have so greatly educated your broad readership in this homeland of ours, and even outside its borders, that is your honor. That your calls echo for beautiful and good causes has borne the fruit of many noble decisions, many good deeds. That is your merit. For your legacy, your merits, we want to raise a memorial statue whose immortality outweighs even the most beautiful words. The stones for it you have gathered during 50 years, so allow us, in turn, to carry out the work of constructing this monument." Unquote. Jókai was the master of all the secrets in narrative art, who captures his readers. His reader is freed only when he reaches the last page of the book. Then he discovers he has lived almost completely forgetting himself in the world of Jókai's creation, and that world is marvelously rich. Both the distant and the recent past, as well as the present, Jókai's own time, most of all the times of Reformation and the liberation struggle, Hungary and the neighboring countries and even distant countries appear in his novels. He takes to the future, deep underground, raises us above the stars. "My tales," he himself writes, quote, "take place on the seas and islands of the seas, in North and South America, in Old and New Egypt, the Rome of the emperors and revolutionary Rome, in Paris, London, St. Petersburg, Poland, also on the Russian steppes, in Siberia, Kamchatka, the history of Turkey, fairy tales of the East and Stambul have an important part in my novels, as do Crimea and the Caucasus, also Persia, Palmyra, Afghanistan, China, the Amur region, the fantastic cities of Asia, Syria and ancient Palestine. The return voyage runs through Sicily and the entire Italian paradise to Ragusa and Bosnia. We continue through Prussia, stopping at Old Vienna. Our flight also takes us into unknown and immaterial territories, lost continents, vanished worlds, to the unreachable North Pole and the dreamland of the future centuries, even to the pre-Pleistocene antediluvian world." Unquote. Jókai's birth town was Komárom. This Hungarian town on the bank of the Danube was marked in the middle of last century by a lively trade. His experience from Komárom, impressions from childhood are reflected strongly in his novels. He earned his school degree in Papa, and there, in the so-called Society for Youth Enlightenment, created by the university students, he first came into contact with literary life. There he became familiar with his contemporary, Sándor Petőfi, who later became the greatest poet of Hungary. The friendship with Petőfi steered his artistic development. With Petőfi, he finds his spiritual home in Pest, in the so-called Young Hungary group. In that circle, he too becomes inspired by the progressive, revolutionary ideas of French literature, and with his art helps to prepare the bourgeois revolution of 1848. Quote, "Our political, social, and literary tendency," Jokai writes, "was new, young, and brave. It differed from all its predecessors and was pioneering, a turning point. The ideas of the modern age penetrated into literary art. The noble inspiration, firm principles, and wonderful dreams of the French writers took hold of everyone who was young and inspired by noble wishes." Unquote. The influence that Petőfi and the year 1848 had on Jokai made its imprint in his entire life and work. The glow of the bonds of friendship with Petőfi radiate even from his final works. And despite his political missteps and compromises, he remained a loyal supporter of the cause of Hungary's liberation struggle to the end. Even when his imagination leads him to romantic one-sidedness, when he puts the human ideal in place of human reality, he remains connected with unbroken ties with Hungarian society. His mistakes are not personal mistakes, nor his illusions personal illusions, but to a much greater degree expressed in most beautiful and noble literary forms, mistakes of the whole country and illusions of the entire society in his time, the time which chose the bourgeois path and dreamt of a bourgeois Hungary. The interest of the great Hungarian writer extended to all areas of life. Originally he wanted to become a painter. He was a lawyer, an attorney, and won some of his cases with great success. He was active in politics his whole life and knew well the life of the Hungarian people. His knowledge of the Hungarian countryside is testified to by his brilliant depictions of rural life. His knowledge of natural science was quite extensive. He used in his works many of the discoveries of the science of his day. For example, his novel, Black Diamonds, begins with an explanation of the Earth's prehistory and the formation of coal. Likewise, he writes a lot about the role that electricity will play in the society of the future. Reading his novels, we get the sense that he knows something about every field. In one of his stories, he wrote about an as-yet undiscovered star in the Andromeda galaxy, and sure enough, astronomers later found such a star. His varied interest in science, technology, poetry, politics, and everyday life are among the most important features of his literary personality. His life was colorful, varied, and rich in experiences. In 1883, on the 40th anniversary of the beginning of his career as a writer, he himself wrote under the heading The Echo of 40 Years, the following, quote, "I traveled with ancient heroes on their victorious quests and wandered with Betyars on the roadless pusta, the swamps and forest thickets." Footnote. Betyars were mostly deserters who didn't want to serve under the imperial flags, as well as serfs running away from the inhuman oppression of their noble lords. They were universally loved by the rural poor because they spared the lives and property of the poor, stealing only from the lords. End of footnote. I was there when Vienna and Budapest were being bombed and besieged, and in the midst of the ruins of Komárom, I saw my world collapse at Világos. Footnote. Világos was the place where the superior Tsarist army of intervention forced the Hungarian Revolutionary Army, or the Honved, to surrender on the 13th of August, 1849. End of footnote. I ate with the Romanis from a pot and at the royal table from silver plates. I was a poor wretch who earned 2 guldens a month by teaching Hungarian to Jewish children, and I was a banker who sprinkled hundreds of thousands around himself. There was a criminal's noose and bands of honor around my neck. I received laurels and mud was poured on me, and I was called the Prince of Riders and Kossuth's dog. For 23 years I prepared a revolution of a certain year, going to war and getting married. None of that I have regretted." Unquote. For his whole life he gradually gathered materials for his works. That diligent, excessively meticulous, tireless work of collecting is demonstrated by his notebooks, where he has written down all his experiences. He had a great understanding of the Hungarian people and its life. Ethnographers are of the opinion that his works are noteworthy ethnographical sources. Not only are his works on ethnographic themes valuable, but also the folk songs and children's games he has written down in his works might well be gathered together into a small folklore collection. The number of fairy tales, sayings, and most varied superstitious beliefs he utilized shows what an astonishingly broad capacity for observation and memory he possessed. He himself tells about it the following, quote, "Everywhere on the pusta," comment by the reader, the pusta is the Hungarian plains. Back to the text. "Everywhere on the pusta and the grazing lands, in solitary rural houses, in shepherds' taverns and fishers' huts, I encountered more and again more life of the people. I got to know the Hungarian tribe in its natural habitat. On the pusta I met judges and soldiers who were there pursuing betyars, and I met roaming betyars when their pursuers weren't nearby. I got to know the rural people's way of thinking, views, songs, sayings, and endless humor. I heard folk tales when the pot was boiling on the campfire, while corn was being threshed and wine harvested. I saw a famous bullfight and a parade of the Pentecost King. All that which nowadays no longer exists. With my own eyes I witnessed a duel on the pusta, while now they are considered mere fairy tales. All of that has been burnt into my memory so firmly, it is as if it only happened yesterday." Unquote. Comment by the reader, Jokai actually has a story called The Yellow Rose, which talks about such a duel on the pusta. It's actually almost like a western, except that it doesn't take place in the American West, but in the Hungarian plain, and they don't use guns. I think they use clubs or something. Back to the text. 3 of his novels should now be mentioned. Sons of the Stone-Hearted Man immortalizes the heroic fighting of the Honved, that is, the Hungarian Revolutionary Army, in the Liberation War. The plot begins like a folk tale. The tyrannical father is dying and on his deathbed tells his wife to get all 3 of his sons into the service of the Viennese autocrat. However, the mother, Mrs. Baratlai, swears she will do exactly the opposite of what her husband had ordered. All 3 sons become heroes of progress and national sovereignty. Ödön leads the progressive gentry of the country. Richard follows the flag of Kossuth, and Jenö sacrifices his life for his brother, who was being tried by the bloody tribunal. The hero of the novel Black Diamonds, Ivan Berend, a Honved officer, is the owner of a mine. For him, the mine is not simply a way of becoming rich and to gain profits. He shares all the revenue of the company with the workers and dedicates his life to the cause of preventing thunderstorms. However, he is also forced to struggle against the profit-seeking Bondavolgi stock company. After many difficulties and mix-ups, he achieves total victory. The stock company goes bankrupt and Ivan succeeds in harnessing thunder with his invention. Jokai has no other novel which includes as much warmth and deep human feeling as Man of Gold. As a simple ferryman with the orphan girl left in his care, Mihai Tisar succeeds not entirely with honest means in becoming the owner of a huge amount of wealth. Year by year he grows his fabulous wealth and in a beautiful way wins himself a faithful spouse. However, his bad conscience bothers him because of his wealth, which he had secretly stolen from his wife. As an ordinary man, he is also not pleased by the world of the rich. For a long time he struggles with himself, until finally he finds happiness on a certain island down the river Danube. Jokai's works fill an entire bookcase. He was unsurpassed in enthusiasm and productivity. His huge life work has mostly stood the test of time. It has proved immortal. His works dealing with the Christian Reformation and the Liberation War portray to the Hungarian people most beautiful chapters from its history. His historical and adventure novels, his stories filled by his rich imagination, captivate everyone. He dedicated his life and his art to the cause of humanity, fought for freedom and the flourishing of his nation, and worked tirelessly for friendship between nations. As the chairman of the Hungarian League of Peace in 1896, he appealed to all history teachers to not subjugate the teaching of history to the service of chauvinism, nationalism, and militarism. In the main features of his novels and all their protagonists we see Jokai's worldview. his deep belief in man and man's consciousness of his calling. His greater works are all permeated by that belief, for which he gives, in his novel Black Diamonds, the following most lofty and poetic form. Quote, "There's something in the fact that a puny inhabitant of a certain spot on this earth became convinced that his invisible star is the center around which the whole heaven, all suns, solar systems and galaxies revolve. If the neighboring solar systems have inhabitants, and I believe they do, and if they have devices with which they can closely observe the said star, and I believe they do, then they will observe these changes with admiration. After the most recent changes, the green islands have been washed away from the blue mirror surface of the seas, and from beneath the oceans new colorful continents have emerged. What plenitude of reborn things, whose creator is man. The bluish blots of swampy areas vanished from the earth's surface. People dried them, and in their place there are now fields full of yellow ripening heads of grain. In the middle of the light-colored, glistening wastelands, there are green dots arranged in neat rows. They are artesian wells, drilled by men, and around them have emerged fertile farms. Twisting and turning rivers have become straight as rulers. The hands of men dug new paths for them. 2 oceans have been separated by a piece of land. At the same time, both oceans flow into one another, regulated by a human hand. In every part of them huge ships sail. They are not monsters molded by God, but noble giants made by humanity. The dark green primal forests have been replaced by bright carpets. The human hand cleared them and put in their place yellow, blue and red flourishing regions covered by useful plants. From coast to coast there run long straight lines, and along them huge queues travel at incredible speed. They are railroads with their cars and locomotives built by the hands of men, and at night bright dots of light shine on Earth's surface and can be seen from far away. What are they? They are cities which people, who love to see, have illuminated during the night. Is this world not much more beautiful than the world of the mammoths was? Cannot the race of dwarves proudly walk on top of the bones of giants? When the inhabitants of neighboring solar systems see this, they can testify to that." Unquote. This spring, when 50 years have passed since the death of MÓR JÓKAI, we want to especially remind people of his faith in humanity, the determination that humanity is capable of creating flourishing and well-being, happiness and peace in the lives of the people.